get her business card, and she can help you out. So it's good to be here with you, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to share an idea about ways that we may be able to improve services and conditions for Louisiana's children. I want to begin by thanking you, and by extension all of Louisiana's press, for shining light into some of Louisiana's dimmest places. You help us see the conditions of children and their families, and without your work, many children would otherwise be left in the dark. Louisiana must have an interested, active, independent press that keeps its eyes on our children. All of you, whatever your beat, are doing essential and courageous work. You shine light into darkness, you give attention, you consider what you see, and then you write about it so that the rest of us can know what's really going on. And there's nothing anonymous about what you do. You write about it, and then you put your name on it and own it. I admire your courage, and I thank you for your work. Through the decades, Louisiana's press has covered the annual Annie E. Casey Foundation's Kids Count reports. So you know Louisiana holds tightly to the average rank of 49th among the states when ranked for child well-being. Louisiana has averaged 49th for more than 3 decades. We've been at the bottom so long that the annual news stories of Louisiana's rank no longer surprise us. These annual reports have lost their ability to shock us as they did when the first Kids Count report was released. That first year, Louisiana ranked 51st out of 50 states because D.C. was included, and they beat us. In 1990, after reading the first Kids Count report, Wiley Hilburn, Judy Johnson, and Frank May wrote a piece for the Shreveport Times titled, "Fund the Future, State Must Prove Kids Do Count," and people across Louisiana said, "Oh my." Well, today we read the Kids Count reports, and we no longer say, "Oh my." Instead, we shrug our shoulders, and we say to ourselves, well, of course, this is Louisiana. That's just the way it is. And that is so sad. This is also why it's crucial that you continue piercing the darkness with your beams of light focused on Louisiana's children. And Louisiana's press did that in 2022 with some exceptional reporting. You covered the struggles of Louisiana's child-serving agencies and reported the tragic consequences for Louisiana's children and families. In 2022, Louisiana's press opened our eyes again. You made people say, "Oh my." You made the public aware of the real cost and consequences of weak child-caring systems upon children and families, so please keep at it. Today, there's no doubt that the conditions for our children must improve. You've made that clear. And because children cannot fix this for themselves, we must do all that we can to make Louisiana better for them. Other states that do better by their children have something we do not. It's a piece of child well-being infrastructure, if you will, that we lack in Louisiana. Most states offer ombudsman services for children. Of course, every state is different, so their ombudsman services also vary. On our website at louisianachildadvocacy.com, we've created a table of legislation the other states have used to create their ombudsman services. We've done the research, and we provide this to be helpful to the legislature if they choose to do something about this. Now, the variety among the states is fascinating, but what 85% of states have in common is that they provide some form of ombudsman services for children. In stark contrast, it's eye-opening to see that the 4 states ranked worst in the nation for child well-being in 2021 had one thing in common: they did not offer ombudsman services for children. Regarding the variety of ombudsman services, some states like Texas, large, they have an array of ombudsmen. They have an ombuds for juvenile justice, one for child welfare, one for children with developmental disabilities, and others. Some states maintain a single office of ombudsman, and that office hears the complaints about all of the state's child-serving agencies. Some have only an ombudsman for foster care. Vermont, North Carolina, Wisconsin, and some others have a Medicaid managed care ombudsman. Vermont's Medicaid Managed Care Ombudsman began work on January the 1st of 1999. 3 months later, by the end of March, that office had assisted 400 callers and closed 344 cases. Most calls to the ombudsman were resolved with brief research and a return call or a call to the MCO. During the first 3 months of operations, 400 Vermonters called the state's new ombuds. And they had about 600,000 people. That was their population. We've got more children than that. You see, people want to be heard. Ombudsmen of many types have assisted children for decades, yet Louisiana has none. Now, regarding the Medicaid Managed Care Ombudsman, Louisiana did consider one. You're thinking, wait a minute, I thought we were talking about ombudsman for children, and we are. You see, Medicaid is the public insurance that covers half the children in Louisiana. These children deserve ombud services. And they almost had access to a consumer ombudsman when the Bayou Health program kicked off. In October 2011, LDH held an advocates conference about the creation of Bayou Health, which was the first version of what we now call Healthy Louisiana. A presentation slide titled Assuring Protections for Medicaid and Law CHIP Members described a Bayou Health consumer ombudsman. I said that people want to be heard. They also want to be protected. And state agencies know this, hence the slide's title, Assuring Protections. Unfortunately, LDH eliminated that office before it launched, and on July 13th, 2012, LDH announced it would not award a contract, but would use existing contracts with contractors and Medicaid staff. But there's this. By definition, Medicaid staff and existing contractors cannot perform ombudsman services independently. You see, they are the same parties against which citizens would complain. So of all the types of ombudsmen to serve children, Louisiana has none, and I believe we should. So let's get deeper into ombud services for children. There's so much to make us think that children could benefit from an Office of Children's Ombudsman. However, to many people, the idea of an ombudsman is new. And it is an odd word. Ombud, ombudsman, ombudsperson, these words sound unusual. However, given our rich diversity in Louisiana, we've got quite a few unique words. I think a few more we can slip in and we'd be okay. And despite the name, the notion of an ombudsman is not new. King Charles XII of Sweden instituted an ombudsman in 1713. Nearly 100 years later, the Swedish Parliament established the first public sector ombudsman in 1809. The word ombudsman is Scandinavian, and it means defender of citizens. An ombudsman is an individual who is the bridge between government and an aggrieved citizen. So we're not in Sweden, but fortunately, we do have an ombudsman example closer to home. If you have visited a nursing home in Louisiana, you probably saw a sign about the ways you can contact the state ombudsman for elderly affairs, which raises the question, why do we have an ombuds for the elderly but not for our children? Well, one is required by federal law and one is not. The federal government passed the Older Americans Act in 1965, which requires all states to provide an ombudsman program for the elderly. Because no federal law requires the same protection for children, states are free to choose whether they protect children's rights in the same way that they must defend the rights of the elderly. Consequently, each state determines whether it listens to children to provide assistance when state services are not up to par. Today, Louisiana is one of the last states without ombudsman services for children. We have more than 1 million children, and each one is a reason for the state to listen. We already have the role of an ombudsman established in the Office of Elderly Affairs, so the concept of an ombudsman for children is not entirely new. We need one. I mentioned that your news reports are like flashlights shining into the darkness. Imagine, if you will, that we had an office of ombudsman for children. That would be like Louisiana intentionally and always kept the lights on for kids. So regarding the task of an ombudsman, if it operates as these offices do in other states, a Louisiana office of children's ombudsman would perform 3 essential tasks. First, it would listen and independently hear and evaluate the complaints of children and parents regarding the services children receive or do not receive from Louisiana's public child-serving agencies. Second, the Office of Children's Ombudsman would be empowered to independently assist children and families in resolving their legitimate grievances. And third, the Ombudsman would issue annual public reports summarizing their work and results. In some states, like Alaska, the Ombudsman's office de-identifies and reports each case. Most states do a cumulative annual report. So let's talk about complaints. In general, no one likes complaints. The complainer does not want to be in a position to have to make a complaint. The person or agency that is the object of the complaint does not want to hear it. I believe complaints have value, but if their value is unappreciated and the complaints are ignored, then complaints can increase the problems and even destroy systems. However, suppose we create a culture in which citizens know they have a safe way to complain about the services their children receive or do not. Then, if citizens know that their complaints will be valued to help improve the state agencies and services, and if citizens anticipate fair treatment, their complaints can become a tool to improve services and maintain quality. So yes, complaints are valuable. And because they are, we must have an ombudsman for children to hear the complaints and process them professionally. Of course, no one wants to expand government or create unnecessary state offices. In fact, someone might reasonably ask, well, Rick, we've gone so long without ombudsman services for children. Why now? What would we gain? So here are the benefits, some of the benefits of providing ombudsman services. First, an Office of Children's Ombudsman will give children a voice when they have legitimate grievances about the services they do or do not receive from state agencies. State agencies are enormous and children are small. When a child does not receive the services that they are due, then the child, parents, or guardian can say to the ombudsman, hey, help me out here, if you will. If the grievance is legitimate, then the ombudsman can step in and, acting as the defender of the citizen, help build a bridge to resolution with a state agency. Without ombud services, no one can help resolve legitimate grievances. When legitimate grievances and complaints smolder, people get burned. I believe an effective Office of Children's Ombudsman, which is likely to be overwhelmed in its first year or two, will, over time, increase citizens' trust in the state agencies providing services to their children. A second benefit of having an Office of Children's Ombudsman is that the Ombud's public reporting would become a knowledge base. I've talked about how a newspaper article can draw attention to the dangers and how that's like focusing a flashlight on a risk hidden in the dark. An Office of Children's Ombudsman will keep the lights on and create a public record of what it finds in the light. A children's ombudsman is responsible for making annual reports available to the legislature, the governor, and the public about their findings. To get a taste of what these reports are like, I encourage you to review some of the information produced by the ombudsman in other states. Links to public reports from other states are available on our website at louisianachildadvocacy.com. At their heart, you will see that these reports provide suggestions for improving services for children. Some of these suggestions will help state agencies improve. Some may inspire lawmakers to make or change laws, and some will help advocates understand where to apply their efforts to improve child well-being. The reports of an ombudsman will be helpful to anyone who desires to make positive changes for children. Also, in other states, these public reports are typically available online. Their collected value and positive impact grow over time because they become a shared library of knowledge about improving services for children. Maybe even more importantly, the value of the Ombuds reports would compound over time. For example, new governors bring to their position their philosophies about public services for children. With a growing collection of public reports from children's ombudsmen, future leaders will have access to a Louisiana-specific knowledge base to help them prevent mistakes of the past. A third, and probably the most significant benefit, is that an Office of Children's Ombudsman eliminates the fear of retaliation. On January the 11th, Ms. Christy Carter, a foster parent from North Louisiana, gave brilliant testimony to the Senate's Health and Welfare Committee about foster care problems and solutions. After Ms. Carter's testimony, Senator Beth Mizell told her, quote, "I get emails all the time from people who are afraid to openly say what you are saying clearly today," unquote. Senator Mizell clearly articulated one of the most important reasons an Office of Children's Ombudsman is necessary. Unfortunately, the fear of retaliation is real. According to West Virginia's Ombuds for Foster Care, 90% of individuals who used the Ombuds services there did so because they feared retaliation from the state's Child Welfare Agency. Created in 2019, the West Virginia Foster Care Ombudsman released its first report on March 25, 2021. The report's first emphasis was on the degree of fear they discovered. On page 3, one reads, quote, "Child welfare practitioners appear to sharply underestimate the impact of the power differential, which is not lost on those they serve. As a large, complex, and often involuntary service, the foster care system can be forbidding and intimidating. It is not surprising that fear is a recurring complaint theme. What is surprising is the pervasiveness of fear and the degree to which fear inhibits or even obliterates constructive communication. Over 90% of complaints to the Foster Care Ombudsman Office, including those from practitioners themselves, cite fear of retaliation as a key factor in choosing this means of intervention." So, giving voice to children, building a knowledge base for leaders, and preventing retaliation are only some of the ways I think an Ombuds office would help Louisiana's children and state agencies. In addition to the 3 I shared in the packet you have, is a page of 9 ways I believe an Office of Children's Ombudsman will be helpful. But there are limitations on the power of an ombudsman. So we've touched on what a children's ombudsman can do. In the spirit of fairness and to prevent unreasonable expectations, I think we should also consider some of the tasks an ombudsman for children cannot do. First, there will be no pie-in-the-sky fixes. An ombudsman for children will not end juvenile crime, improve working conditions in state agencies, or provide a quick solution to poor child well-being in Louisiana, at least not directly. If you read Andrea Gallo's Christmas morning article, "Louisiana, an Outlier for Lacking Children's Ombudsman," you probably noticed the comments by Mr. Stephen Dixon, an attorney for the national nonprofit Children's Rights. Around the country, they do incredible work on behalf of children. You read, quote, "Not everyone is a believer in the power of an ombudsman. Dixon, who often represents children in states that have ombudsman's offices, said they are often toothless and unable to bring litigation against the systems they oversee," unquote. Mr. Dixon is a good man. He introduced me to Rhino Coffee in Shreveport, and he has rich experience. So you can trust that he is correct. By design, an ombudsman has no policing authority. This is true everywhere, and the lack of teeth does create frustration. Just last week, the Franklin County Maine's Daily Bulldog ran an article titled "Politics and Other Mistakes, DHHS Never Listens," which describes a 5-year history of reports by Maine's Child Services Ombudsman detailing deficiencies in the Department of Health and Human Services child welfare operations. Maine's Child Welfare Agency ignored the Ombudsman's report until recent deaths of children drew attention to them. So even if an ombudsman's report provides transparent information about opportunities to improve public services for children, it is still incumbent upon the government officials and the state employees to use that information to make corrections. The limitations on the bite of an independent ombudsman are fundamental and necessary. The frustrations created by the restrictions are understandable. We all want good things for our children, and we want them now. Of course, there are other limits to what an ombudsman can do. While ombudsmen are often attorneys, they cannot give legal advice. They cannot reverse or overturn a state agency policy or decision, and they cannot act on matters related to personnel or discrimination. So, with these limitations on the role of an ombudsman, it is crucial to keep in mind that the things an ombudsman cannot do not prevent an ombudsman from doing what they are designed to do. So where do you put an ombudsman? Every ombudsman's office must have a place in its state org chart, and states choose different places for their ombud services. Let me say this: Louisiana's legislature is not reluctant to act on behalf of children. Since 2015, the Louisiana legislature has been the fourth most active among the 16 southern states on child well-being and child welfare legislation. In recent months, we've watched the Senate Health and Welfare Committee engage to help DCFS make necessary corrections. So here's the essential question. If we have a legislature that is active on children's issues, why is child well-being still sitting on the bottom of the sea? Imagine a submarine without a periscope. Now, think of the Louisiana Office of Children's Ombudsman as that missing periscope, the essential tool that our legislature needs to expand its perspective on the needs of Louisiana's children. So perhaps the ombudsman could work independently if associated with a health and welfare committee, as an idea. Creating an Office of Children's Ombudsman is not beyond us. We already have evidence that the state of Louisiana understands the value of an ombudsman. We do have an ombudsman for the elderly. We almost had a consumer ombudsman for Medicaid managed care. We have evidence from across the nation that ombud services for children help protect children's rights. Certainly, Louisiana's press keeps the evidence before us. What we've been doing in Louisiana has not worked. I believe listening to families' complaints about the services children receive or do not receive, resolving those that are legitimate, and publicly reporting on them will make Louisiana a better place for kids and create a better future for all of us. I thank you for this time today. If you remember only one thing, let it be this. In 2022, Louisiana's press focused our attention on our state's struggles to care well for children. Your good work makes it evident that Louisiana requires an Office of Children's Ombudsman. Thank you. Question.
Who would the ombudsman report to?
The question was, who would the ombudsman report to? That's a very good question. So it varies by state, and we don't know in Louisiana what that would look like. But the ombudsman may be, in some states, in the governor's office. Often they will be independent and report to a legislature. But in Louisiana, because we don't have the office, it really would be a function of the decisions that our legislature makes to create that office. Yes, sir.
It would seem that a single person would be quickly overwhelmed. Is that likely?
Oh, yes. The question was, it seems a single person would be quickly overwhelmed, and that's absolutely correct. It would take a single person and a staff to create the office, I imagine, in the first year or two. But, you know, we've got 1 million kids, and 1 or 2 people probably are not sufficient to, especially in an ongoing operation, assure that all of those complaints can be heard.
Shouldn't it be statewide then?
Well, it would have to be statewide. I'm sorry, the question was, shouldn't it be statewide? But yes, sir, I believe it would have to be a statewide public agency, independent of others.
What's been the pushback? Why hasn't it happened yet?
The question is, what has been pushed back? Why hasn't it happened yet? I don't have an answer for that. I don't know that there's any active pushback. At least I haven't picked up on any. I've not talked about this with anyone and had someone say, "Well, that's just a bad idea." We don't lead the nation in child well-being.
What legislator, you mentioned Senator Mizell, what legislator group, if you will, have you talked to about this? Seems to understand it.
The question is, what legislative group or individuals, I guess, have we talked to about this and seen that they understand what we're talking about? I'm very fortunate today to be right next to a whole table of experts on the political aspects of how this can happen, and so I'm going to pass that question to Susan Nelson.
Thank you. And we've been working, I'm Susan East Nelson. I'm the Executive Director of the Louisiana Partnership for Children and Families. And this is what we do, advocacy work before the legislature on behalf of these issues. And there was great interest coming out of Senate Health and Welfare. And so far, we've already gotten a commitment from one senator to sponsor and a co-sponsor in Senator Mizell.
Senator Mizell.
Well, she's not the one because they're limited to 5 bills this session. So we have a commitment of one of the 5 is being held for this legislation by another senator.
How about Regina Barrow? Is she on board?
Yes, very much so.
Because we're going to be coming up on an election year this year, and legislators are very hesitant to do anything at all in an election year. But would it be advisable to maybe get with the legislators to at least have them do the kind of things that would be appropriate for them to be able to do something about that the following year?
Yeah, I really think this is right in line with what they want to do, and they see it as a constituent service issue. We've had so many parents come before Health and Welfare and other committees as well, education, these same types of issues. And you're seeing the legislators be very interested in having a place to just receive that, so they don't have to worry about going to, 154 colleagues. They can just say, 149 colleagues, sorry. And they can just say, we have this issue, people are calling our office. And what, Rick and I have really envisioned, and as I've talked to him with it, is maybe we start small with one, like he said, one staff, but then eventually there would be like regional offices that could really have a lay of the land and know what's going on in each of those regions and report that back directly to the legislature as a check. I mean, this is really about checks and balances. If you think about constitutionality, this is really about checks and balances. And so the risk is, if you have it in the governor's office, where's the check, right? Yeah.
It's just going to slide things over.
There's a big risk there. And I'm not saying that there aren't states that do it successfully and it works well, but I think you really, at least in our dynamic in Louisiana, you lose that check.
You've got this $1.2 million, I think, for the elderly, and I think that's a reasonable figure if you properly structure it for the children. Is that what you're thinking as well?
The question was, there's $1.2 million in the budget for the ombudsman for the elderly's office, and does that seem like a reasonable amount for a children's ombudsman? And I think it probably is a reasonable starting amount. It's a good example that's already in place.
I'm sorry, did you have another question?
Well, I did, but I was just thinking, one of the things, because we have a limitation on the number of state agencies, and since you're dealing with something that would require a statewide, things and jurisdiction.
Sure.
And I'm saying that's the kind of thing that could be taken care of this year, perhaps.
Right.
Without objection and but possibility of doing something that really needs to be done next year.
Yeah, I mean, when this idea came up, I said, let's try. I mean, if you don't try, the answer is definitely no, right? So this could be a building on, but there was really an appetite to do this. And one of the things, particularly when we talk about ombuds, is if you think about the governor's office, they have really limited authority over the Department of Education. And we talked, to Rick's point about teeth. If you called the governor's office to complain about something the Department of Education is doing, the governor would be like, well, I've got 3 DESI members. That's all I've got. If you call a legislator, there's a hearing, right? If it comes up to that level. So we're talking about teeth, and I think there is definitely an appetite among the legislators to have some teeth. So.
Yes, sir.
You mentioned in your, I guess it was Susan's talk about maybe it would be statewide at some point. Y'all talked about it again, but how many, if it were to go statewide, how many officers would it entail?
The question is, if the Ombudsman Services is a statewide service, how many offices would it entail? I think it would be reasonable to think that each region would have an office for an ombudsman that probably reported to the ombudsman, and I would guess they would be located in Baton Rouge, like the lead ombudsman.
And then another question, you were talking about who would the person report to, and you weren't sure how it would be set up, but who does the ombudsman for the elderly report to?
The ombudsman for the elderly is in the governor's office of elderly affairs. So I'm guessing the governor.
One of the concerns that advocates have had for years is that the federal law requires the department to have citizen advisory councils. And the department has never done anything but meet the absolute bare minimum of that. And I couldn't even tell you right now where the 2 or 3 are that supposedly meet that criteria. Have you thought about doing a parallel track where we encourage the development of those and have a way for the advisory councils to work with the ombudsman? Because that's a way to build more community support for the changes that we all know we need to make.
The question was, so the creation of community panels is something that doesn't happen as often as it should in Louisiana, and essentially, could that structure parallel with an ombudsman process feed information to the ombuds office and build community in the process? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, been at several of the department meetings, conference stands with the conference of Catholic bishops on this particular issue, and on several occasions, they have appealed to the bigger issues like, poverty, social determined health, things, fentanyl. I'm wondering, certainly probably an office could have some effectiveness in terms of maybe some internal processes that could be improved in the department. But the fundamental issue is these poverty issues. And I'm trying to see how you would effectively measure an office when the problems are so systemic, especially in Louisiana with poverty. And the secretary has said that several times, that she likes the community needs to step up, the faith community, et cetera, that these are systemic issues that are bubbling to the top now. So I just didn't know how the office even conceptualizes that, or if you've seen offices conceptualize the differences between improvements in processes, maybe quicker triages of these difficult cases, et cetera, versus the systemic structural problems that need to be corrected in Louisiana.
The question is there, because I'm going to paraphrase. So Louisiana, we have systemic problems like many states, but in the sea of systemic problems. We have families and individual children who are struggling, and state agencies are responsible for meeting some of those needs. And when those needs for an individual child are not being met, they're not receiving services that they should receive, or they're receiving services that aren't up to par, then that child's family or guardian would have access to an ombudsman. And so the ombudsman's office isn't something I see as being able to come in and make systemic change, but for each child who receives benefit from that process, it changes that child's life, potentially.
And I think one of the challenges we have, and this is where an ombuds could really step in, is data. You know, a lot of times these people come before committees and it's the first a lot of people have heard about a particular issue, like, you know, a particular issue with training or access or one of those pieces. Well, if you have the ombuds, you can say, we had 50 calls last month about X. So this tells us that this is an area that we need to do some systemic investment in and really look at the systems piece from there.
Very good. Yes, sir.
What state do you think performs to what you want to do? What's your model?
There's several.
Yeah. So the question is, what state is doing what we would like to see done in Louisiana? And there are several that have effective ombudsman services. So if you look up on the northeast coast, I mentioned Maine and the fact that their ombudsman had for 5 years made complaints and issued reports. So there are several states that I think serve as good examples. I think that's also an example of the fact that just having a good ombudsman doesn't solve your problems. You still have to have state agencies and leaders who are willing to hear those reports.
So the media is a pretty big mover in that regard. They've done. We've got a lot of problems lately. Bringing up, you mentioned Andre Gallo. That's pretty good. I want to go back and look at that article she wrote. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
John's moving.
You know, Sarah's here as a development person. Can you tell us exactly what she would be raising money for specifically?
So Sarah Head is our, the question is, Sarah Head is here as our development public relations director. And the question is, what is she raising money for? Are you asking questions about whether she's raising money for an ombuds type or?
No, just for the organization.
That's a very good question. And so do you mind if Sarah answers that? Oh, come on, Sarah.
Hello, thanks for the question, John. So just to talk a little bit about what Louisiana United Methodist Children and Family Services is, we're an organization that's statewide in Louisiana with 120 years of experience providing services to Louisiana's children and families in need. So that ranges from our 3 children's homes. We have 3 children's homes across the state in the North region, one in Southeast and one in Southwest, that provides intensive residential care to children with severe emotional and behavioral needs. We also have a statewide therapeutic foster care program. We do statewide life skills training for children who are aging into independent living, among a variety of other advocacy and community-based services for children and families in need. So Rick is a fantastic leader of our organization, and I travel all over the state raising awareness for what we do and the work that we do across the state. So, yes, sir.